Okay. Well, welcome to our presentation. My name is Selma, and together with Audrey, I'm going to tell you a bit more about how attachment with your primary caregiver influences your first adult relationship. It's all about attachment theory, which we will explain to you in a minute. So first, we're going to give a short introduction to the attachment theory, and then we will discuss the network that we built and some simulations of 2 scenarios. And then we finish off with a conclusion and a discussion. So first, let's start with an introduction to attachment theory. It's all based on, well, one of the most important experiments of attachment theory is the strange situation. And that's the situation where the primary caregiver, so usually that's the mother, comes to the room with her baby, and she plays a little bit with her baby, and after a certain point in time, she leaves. And when she leaves the room, the baby starts to panic or starts to cry or starts to become anxious. And then when she comes back, we can see the reaction of the baby to his primary caregiver. So some babies really start to run towards their mother, but other babies start to cry or ignore their mother, or we have so many different reactions to those between the primary caregiver and the baby, and those interactions are very important elements to the attachment theory. So they really show the baby's attachment behavior, and this attachment behavior really influences this baby's relationships, even at a small age, but also at an older age. You can see that those interactions are very important. So in this picture, you can see 4 different attachment styles, and Audrey will explain them in a minute more in depth. But basically, you have several reactions of the child to his primary caregiver whenever she leaves or comes back, and those interactions are very important. So we really wanted to model those interactions, and especially those attachment styles.
Yeah, so first I will shortly take you through how this attachment behavior is actually created. The early experience with the primary caregiver can promote or inhibit the development of 3 principles of bonding, bonding, emotion regulation, and adaptiveness. And in this way, the early experiences with the primary caregiver kind of form a main input for the child to then develop a set of memories, emotions, thoughts, expectations, behaviors, and beliefs about itself and about others. So for example, if the caretaker shows high levels of parental sensitivity, reliability, responsiveness, so when the child hurts itself, they go and check if the child is okay, they ask the child, are you okay? And if the child is actually hurt, they also try to react in an appropriate way to that. Then the child will also develop positive models about itself and about others, because it is stimulated to realize that it can take care of itself, but it also knows that it can trust others to be there if she needs them. And with these internal models, the children predict the primary caregiver's behavior and they plan their own behavior. These internal models keep changing with age and with experience, but the first input from the primary caregiver kind of forms a blueprint on which children base their future relationships. Next slide, please. Mm-hmm. And as Selma mentioned, during Bowlby's experiment, children reacted in different ways when their mother returned to the room. And over time, a total of 4 attachment styles has been classified. And before we move on to our own model, I will shortly take you through the 4 of these. The first attachment style is secure attachment. This style is developed in a child when the primary caregiver is sensitive, reliable, and responsive, which leads to positive models about self and about other. And this results in a low level of dependence and avoidance. So the dependence is kind of based on whether you realize you can do something by yourself or if you really depend on others to take care of you. And the avoidance is more related to proximity seeking and being open to approach new people. So the resulting behavior is also to seek proximity and consider the self as worthy of love and support, and also realize that others can be trusted. This secure attachment is considered to be the healthy attachment pattern and is luckily also the most prevalent attachment pattern. Then the next attachment pattern is the anxious avoidant attachment. This is usually developed when the primary caregiver is insensitive or even rejecting towards the child. The parental style does lead to a positive model of self because the child has to take care of a lot of things by itself, so it knows that it can depend on itself. And a negative model of other because it cannot depend on the parent to take care of them. And this results in a low dependence and high avoidance. And then the resulting behavior is to avoid proximity in a way to protect against disappointment. And the anxious avoidance is the second most prevalent attachment style. Then the third style is the anxious ambivalent attachment. Again, also named anxious, but in this case, the primary caregiver is considered to be unreliable and unresponsive towards the child. The style leads to a negative model of self and a positive model of other, and that results in high dependence and low avoidance. And this results in behavior that is hesitant in seeking proximity, but to protect against disappointment, these anxious ambivalent attached people, they do try to get accepted by others in a way to lift their own self-acceptance. And then the last style is the disorganized attachment. This style is developed when parents are abusive or they neglect their child. And the parental style leads to negative models of both self and of other, which results in high dependence and also high avoidance. The resulting behavior is to avoid proximity as a way to protect against rejection from others, because the disorganized attached people, they expect others to reject them.
Okay, so now we proceed with the network that we've created. We worked quite along on this model. I hope you can see it, but it was quite difficult to really make a very sharp screenshot of it. But our model consists of 47 states, and most of those states are on the base level, and you can divide this model into like 4 components, like four models into like one big model, and they are all connected with each other. So I can show it to you. Maybe you can I can show it to you in a bit. So what you will see here, which I will explain to you in a minute, is how the attachment style is formed. So between the interactions between the primary caregiver and the child, those lead to an attachment behavior, and this attachment behavior of the child then is also formed with the self model and the other model, so how the child views himself and how he views others. And we also have a sub model where a new person comes into the life of this child with an attachment behavior. So at that time, this child is now an adult, and this adult meets a new person. This person is securely attached. So we can then try to model how this adult reacts to this securely attached person. So that's the part that we also explain. And then we have the weight states and the persistence factor, which contribute to maintaining kind of blueprints of the attachment style. So this is the first component, like the first submodel, where we have this primary caregiver, and the interactions with the primary caregiver lead to this attachment style of the individual. And those are the three concepts. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the three concepts of this primary caregiver, which Audrey also explained. So to what extent is this primary caregiver reliable, sensitive, and responsive? And those three factors then influence how the individual can regulate his emotions, how he or she adapts to growth or to new situations, and how he bonds with others. Then we have the second submodel, which where you can see that those three factors that I just explained from the individual influence his view of himself, so his emotions about himself, expectations about himself, but also about others. So expectations, behaviors, beliefs, all those elements are the self model and the other model, which are very important in this attachment style or behavior.
And the previous part showed the input of the primary caregiver and the other person, how it leads to mental processes. And this part is more about how it eventually leads to action. So after the other person comes into the life of our main character, the main character eventually develops feelings for this person. And these feelings are represented in X22, the sensor state, which then leads to the sensory representation X23. And as we shortly mentioned before, there are two actions involved for the attachment theory, the dependence and avoidance. Here we named them dependence and proximity seeking. And the main character will prepare for each of these actions. And from literature, we learned that the dependence is influenced by the model of self, and that proximity seeking is influenced by the model of other. And therefore, the preparation states also get input from the model of self and the model of other states. Then the two preparation states X24 and X25 result in a level of dependence, and X26 and the level of proximity seeking, X27. The execution of these actions then leads to a reaction from the other person, which we see in X28 and X29 for each action. And eventually both the actions and the reactions of the other person are evaluated by the main character. And these evaluations can then influence the model of self and the model of other. And the attachment patterns are learned, so they have to be remembered. To ensure that the main character remembers what they learned during the previous interactions, we added two levels to the basic level. In the first level, the blue level, we see the W states, with which the main character remembers what they learned about bonding, emotion regulation, adaptiveness. And we also see the W states, with which the main character remembers what they learned about the model of self and the model of other, which is X35 to X46. And then in the second level, the purple level, there's only one state, the X47 for persistence. And this state was created to ensure that the learned attachment persists, even when it's not reinforced with a new relationship. And as the primary caregiver is the first person to provide any input for the main character, this is the first pattern for attachment that is learned. So that means that the primary caregiver leads to the creation of a blueprint, so to say, with which the main character will approach new people. And this blueprint can be changed when encountering new people. And therefore the inputs come from the abstract person and not only from the primary caregiver.
So now we proceed with scenario simulation. In total, we have two scenarios. The first one is where we have a securely attached primary caregiver and a securely attached other person. So this other person is this person with individual needs at an adult age. And then Audrey will also explain another scenario with anxious avoidant primary caregiver. Anyway, what you can see here in the scenario is are the interactions of the individual with this primary caregiver. So this primary caregiver interacts at with certain levels of responsiveness, reliability, and sensitivity. And since this primary caregiver is securely attached, we have kind of healthy values for this primary caregiver. And you can see all those states here, the weight state, W states, and yeah, well, all states. And then at a certain point in time, this primary caregiver leaves, so to say, and we have those weight states, which kind of are the blueprint for the attachment style, because this attachment style needs to be saved. This is something that stays with the person. And then here you can see this new person coming into the life of the individual, and this new person is also securely attached. So there is a kind of equilibrium between the actions. There's a kind of basic level where nothing really seems to change, because this other person is kind of the same as the primary caregiver when you look at the secure attachment. And this is the same simulation, but then more focused on the actions. And what you can see here is that we have two actions, but they overlap, and that's because we have the same values for dependence, so for action 1 and for action 2. Because with secure attachment, you have a kind of equilibrium between those actions. So first you will start, you have the sensor state when this person comes into the life of the individual, and then preparation towards the action, execution of the actions, evaluations of the actions by the individual, and the other person's reaction to the action. And all those two actions overlap, the two evaluations overlap, everything is kind of in an equilibrium.
And then this graph shows the second scenario which was simulated. Here the main character has a primary caregiver that's insensitive and rejecting towards the main character. So that would create the anxious avoidant attachment pattern. And as we can see, this leads to lower values on the left part of the graph. There are a few that are lower than we saw before. And with the next peak, the other person comes into the life of the main character, but this person is sensitive, reliable, and responsive, so would initiate a secure attachment pattern. And it takes a little bit of time, but we see that at some point the main character adapts the learned pattern and even reaches values of the securely attached person. So even though the past experiences can have a profound impact, it's still possible to adapt and improve learned attachment patterns. And just like we did for the secure attachment, we'll also take a closer look at the actions in this scenario. And we see that action 1, where the level of dependence still reaches the balance range of 0.5, even with the input of an insensitive and rejecting parent.
What's this plus 9 for me? Oh wait, sorry, no, wait, actually I took 3 pawns off. I didn't take a
Okay. The level of dependence then stays in the balance range when interacting with the other person. And the other action, action 2, or the level of proximity seeking, is below the balance range due to the insensitive and rejecting parent. But as we mentioned before, when interacting with the other person, our main character learns what a balanced level of proximity seeking is and adapts their level of proximity seeking accordingly.
So now we arrive at the end of this presentation. So in this presentation and in this period, we try to model all kinds of elements of attachment theory. So we started with how to model how this attachment style forms between the interaction, based on the interactions between the individual and its primary caregiver. And then we shifted towards how this attachment behavior changes at an adult age, and how it's adapted based on this future relationships with the new other person in the life of this individual.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to investigate every possible scenario for different attachment patterns. So we have some recommendations also for future research. So firstly, the other 2 attachment patterns could be simulated, and we do kind of have expectations of how they should look because we looked into the literature. So for the anxious ambivalent attachment, the simulation would show a heightened level of dependence and a balanced level of proximity seeking. And the disorganized attachment, the simulation would show a heightened level of dependence and a lowered level of proximity seeking. And future research could also explore how simulations would look when the other person is not sensitive, reliable, and responsive, because we only looked at other persons that were secure. And it was really interesting to do this research, but it is important to mention that the simulation of social interactions is very complex, and our model already has a lot of states, but it's impossible to include every single thing that would influence the simulations. So our model, even though it's very extensive, is still a simplified version of that reality. And additionally, it takes time to adapt attachment styles. So in our simulations, the main character almost immediately learns to adapt and how to adapt, even when meeting only one other person. And in reality, this would probably take much more time and also require multiple interactions with different people.
So thank you for your attention. And you can imagine that you may be curious to see what your own attachment style is. So if that's the case, then you can maybe visit this link and do the test yourself. Thanks. If you have any questions,